On final at one of the biggest airports in Asia, Cathay Pacific Flight 780 is approaching for landing. But something's wrong. They're stuck on high thrust. What happened and how did this timeline of events occur? Cathay Pacific Flight 780 is preparing for their flight from Surabaya, Indonesia to Hong Kong. Flight 780 was operated with an Airbus A330-300 registered Bravo Hotel Lima Lima. The A330 first flew on November 4, 1998, being delivered to Cathay Pacific only a few weeks later, and the A330 had two Trent 700 engines. Flight 780 was piloted by two Australian pilots, one of which is Captain Malcolm Waters, who worked with Cathay Pacific for 12 years. And 37-year-old First Officer David Hayhoe, who worked with Cathay Pacific for 3 years, and also had previously worked in the Royal Australian Air Force for 11 years. On board Flight 780, along with the two pilots, there are 11 cabin crew for a total of 13 crew members on board. Along with that, there were 309 passengers, for a total of 322 people, along with 33,400 kilograms of fuel on board. 8 a.m., April 13, 2010. Cathay Pacific Flight 780 is at Stand 8 in Juanda International Airport in Surabaya, Indonesia. Flight 780 is boarding passengers and loading up cargo and fuel, during which the pilots are doing a pre-flight inspection, and so far they didn't find anything wrong or amiss. Flight 780 left the stand at around 8:11 a.m. and took off from Surabaya Airport only a few minutes later at 8:24, bound for Hong Kong. While the plane was climbing, nothing significant was happening to the plane as it was climbing to 39,000 feet, but the pilots did get some small engine pressure ratio, or EPR, fluctuations. When the flight reached 39,000 feet, the plane's ECAM, or Electronic Centralized Aircraft Monitoring System, displayed an Engine 2 critical system fault and an engine slow response message. But as engine control was relatively normal, the flight continued on. Around 10:16, the Engine 2 critical system fault had reappeared on the pilot's ECAM display, and they contacted maintenance again, but they got the same response since the engine parameters were normal. Flight 780 entered Hong Kong airspace at around 12:55 p.m. and starting descent towards Hong Kong at around 1 p.m. local time. At 1:19, the ECAM displayed Engine 1 critical system fault and Engine 2 stall, which signified that the right engine was having a compressor stall in which the engine's airflow was being disrupted, leading to a possible loss of thrust on the engine. Along with that, before the Engine 2 stall warning displayed, the captain could smell some ozone and a burning smell. This was happening while the plane was descending through 30,000 feet, still 110 nautical miles from Hong Kong. They put Engine 2 into idle mode and Engine 1 into maximum continuous thrust to balance out the stalled Engine 2. They declared pan a few minutes later at 1:21 p.m., which is an urgent call but not a full-blown emergency like a mayday. But at 1:30 p.m., Engine 1 stalled. The aircraft at the time was going around 295 knots and at this time was leveling off at 8,000 feet. Now that both engines were stalled, the pilots called in for a mayday, a more severe distress signal from the pan. The pilots tested their engine control by pushing their thrust levers. While Engine 1 went up to 74% thrust, Engine 2 remained at 17% thrust in the idle position. A few minutes later, the pilots gave a passenger announcement for the cabin crew to prepare for landing. At 1:31, they tried to decrease Engine 1's thrust level, but the engine stayed at 74% thrust. Only a minute later, they announced to the cabin that they were, quote, having a small problem with the engines. But Flight 780 was pretty much stuck in high thrust, going at a speed of 234 knots, with the normal landing speed of an A330 at 158 knots. The pilots tried to keep their speed as low as possible towards the regular landing speed, but as they approached the airport, heading into final, the overspeed alarm triggered as they went into 240 knots. At 1:43 p.m., Flight 780 touched down on runway 07 left at a speed of 231 knots, 96 knots above the normal landing speed of an A330. Upon touchdown, the right gear bounced and the plane briefly went airborne before they touched back down, scraping the left engine on the runway, while the plane's speed brakes on the wings deployed, only engine 1's reverse thrust deployed. Flight 780 was barreling down the 12,470-foot-long runway at staggering speeds, with the pilots putting max brakes, causing 5 tires to burst. But thankfully, Flight 780 came to a stop only 300 meters from the end of the runway. As Flight 780 came to a stop on runway 07 left, 5 of the 8 tires on the plane's main gears had deflated. The pilots then evacuated the 322 occupants, with 63 people being injured during the landing evacuation, with 10 of them being sent to the hospital for their injuries. The fire crew were already awaiting Flight 780's landing from the sidelines of the runway. They went in after the pilots asked them to check if the wheels had started to smoke or catch fire, but as they came in during the evacuation, they confirmed that the wheels hadn't caught fire. In the aftermath, all 322 occupants survived, with only 63 of them being injured. The damage to the AC-30 was not bad enough for the plane to be written off, so it was put back into service. During the investigation, Hong Kong's Civil Aviation Department collaborated with the British, French, Indonesian, and American safety boards/committees, in which they focused on the engine since they saw in the FDR and CVR and testimonies from the pilots that engine 1 was stuck in high thrust. They later found the cause to be the fuel from Surabaya, which was contaminated with particles called SAP or superabsorbent polymers. These SAP particles came from salt water that came into the plane's fuel supply while they were loading up at Surabaya. These SAP particles interfered with the plane's fuel metering unit, causing it to seize and get stuck at the thrust levels they were recorded in. This then led to the loss of engine control, causing the engines to be stuck in that thrust level. The SAP particles also made their way into other parts of the engine, making the situation even worse. They found that Juanda Airport's fuel pipelines were recently extended, along with the construction of new parking bays for aircraft, but not all procedures were followed during the construction, which led to salt water getting into the fuel supply. The investigators later published a final report on the accident in July 2013. The aircraft was repaired and put back into service later on, being transferred to Dragon Air, now Cathay Dragon. The A330 flew with Cathay Dragon until August 2020 and was scrapped in November 2021. After the incident, pilots Malcolm Waters and David Hayhoe were hailed as heroes, being compared to the pilots of US Airways Flight 1549, a flight that landed on the Hudson River a year prior. Cathay Pacific 780 was a miracle and a show of bravery and skill from the 2 pilots, with all 322 occupants on board surviving the harrowing accident. Hey guys, hope you learned something new from this episode, and, well, wasn't lying when I told you it wouldn't take that long. Anyways, I'm gonna start working on the next episode immediately after this, and this one might take a while because I'm gonna be animating it again. So, take a few guesses on what episode it could be. It involves an accident with another connection to engines. So, hope you enjoyed and learned something new. Bye!